At some point in your life, you stopped asking what you wanted and started asking what you were supposed to want. You didn't notice when it happened. That's the point, because the most powerful systems are the ones you never feel. You feel their results, the tightness at the end of the month, the vague anxiety of falling behind, the exhaustion of maintaining a life that looks correct, but never quite feels like yours. That feeling has a name, and it's costing you more than money. Most people assume that feeling is personal, a character flaw, a discipline problem, a mindset issue. It isn't. It's the feeling of living inside a system you were placed in before you were old enough to question it. A system that decided what a successful life looks like, what a responsible adult owns, what timeline you should be on, what version of you is acceptable. And the most sophisticated part of this system, it doesn't feel like a system. It feels like your own thoughts, your own ambitions, your own sense of what's missing. That's what we're going to take apart today. Not your expenses, not your habits, the architecture underneath them. Here is the first uncomfortable truth. Most of what you want was installed before you had a say in it. That sounds extreme. So let's make it concrete. Wanting a job title, not because it fulfills you, but because it sounds like the right answer when someone asks. Wanting an apartment in the right neighborhood, not because you love it, but because a different address would require explanation. Wanting the car, the wardrobe, the relationship timeline, not because you consciously chose them, but because they became the definition of doing well. Now here's the question no one asks. Where did that definition come from? In 1928, Edward Bernays, Sigmund Freud's nephew, wrote a book called Propaganda. His core idea was, if you link a product to a human emotion, people will believe the desire is theirs. He didn't want to sell people things. He wanted to make people believe they already wanted those things. Women weren't smoking in public in the 1920s. He hired women to light cigarettes at a public march and called them torches of freedom. He tied a product to identity, to liberation, to power. Within a year, the social norm had flipped. The technique never stopped. It became the foundation of every advertising industry that followed. Every time you see an ad that doesn't show you a product, it shows you a feeling. That's the same technique. Running on better technology. Pointed directly at your insecurities. Your desire for the thing was manufactured before you saw the thing. The product just arrived at the right moment. Now let's talk about how this plays out in your actual life. Because it's not random. It follows a pattern. I call it the normal loop. And once you see it, you'll see it everywhere. Step 1. You see what others have. A friend gets the promotion. A colleague buys the house. Someone you follow online posts the trip. Step 2. You feel behind. Not because you're failing objectively, but because your brain is doing an automatic calculation. Where am I relative to them? Step 3. You spend to close the gap. The new outfit, the nicer apartment, the dinner that says, I'm doing fine. Step 4. Your baseline rises. Now this is the new normal. This is the minimum acceptable version of your life. Anything less feels like a step back. Step 5. You repeat. That's the loop. And it doesn't require anyone to force you into it. It runs automatically, because it's built on something ancient. Your survival instinct. Here's what most financial content misses entirely. The reason you run the normal loop has nothing to do with materialism. It has everything to do with fear. For most of human history, tens of thousands of years, being excluded from the group meant death. No tribe meant no food. No community meant no protection. Belonging wasn't a preference, it was survival. That instinct is still in you. The anxiety you feel when you can't afford the group dinner. The shame of driving the wrong car to the right neighborhood. The quiet dread of being the person who couldn't make it work. That feeling isn't vanity. That's your ancient brain screaming. You're being separated from the group. This is dangerous. And the modern economy learned how to speak that language fluently. Every product that sells belonging, the brand, the membership, the neighborhood, the degree, is targeting a fear that is 60,000 years old. Your insecurity is their inventory. That's not a metaphor. That's the business model. Now let's go one level deeper. Because the normal loop doesn't just govern what you buy, it governs how you live. There's a concept called the life script. Society has a pre-written narrative for what a successful life looks like. And most people follow it without ever knowing it exists. Study hard. Get the degree. Get the respectable job. Get into a relationship at the right time. Buy the property. Get married. Have children. Work until retirement. Nothing about that sequence is wrong. For many people, it's genuinely right. But here's the question: did you choose it, or did it choose you? Because the script arrives packaged as maturity, as responsibility, as what serious people do. And every stage of the script comes with a purchase attached. The degree requires tuition. The job requires a wardrobe. The relationship requires an apartment that's appropriate for two. The marriage requires a ceremony. The children require a house with the right number of rooms. Each milestone is also a transaction. And the transaction is not optional, because opting out of the purchase means opting out of the milestone. And opting out of the milestone means deviating from the script. And deviating from the script feels dangerous. Not because anyone threatens you, but because of what happens socially when you deviate. The person who doesn't buy the house gets, "But aren't you worried about the future?" The person who doesn't have children by 35 gets, "But don't you want a family?" The person who leaves the stable career gets, "But what's your plan?" These aren't questions, they're pressure, applied by people who are themselves inside the script, and for whom your deviation is a threat. Because it raises a question they've worked hard not to ask. What if I didn't have to either? Here's where we step back and look at the full picture. Everything we've described, the manufactured desires, the normal loop, the belonging instinct, the life script, these are not accidents. They are features. A population that follows the script is a population that consumes predictably, buys at the expected stages, works hard to maintain status, stays inside the system because the system has made outside feel irresponsible. The philosopher Michel Foucault described this as discipline without force. You don't need a guard to keep people in line if they're monitoring each other. If the fear of social disapproval is sufficient to regulate behavior. If people are policing themselves and calling it personal responsibility. Feeling guilty for spending less than your peers. Feeling embarrassed to drive the cheaper car. Feeling like you need to justify a smaller apartment. No one put a gun to your head. The system doesn't need to. It outsourced enforcement to your social group. And your social group outsourced it to their shame. And so the whole thing runs, without a villain, without a conspiracy. Just a structure doing exactly what it was built to do. So let's name what's been happening. Your desires were shaped by forces you didn't choose, through techniques refined over 100 years, targeting an instinct 60,000 years old. Your spending patterns aren't personal failures. They are predictable outputs of a system that depends on them. The life you're maintaining, the one that costs more than it should, that feels slightly off even when it looks right, is not entirely your life. Parts of it are. But parts of it are someone else's definition of what your life should look like. And you've been paying to maintain both without knowing the difference. The question is not, how do I spend less? That's a symptom fix. The real question is, which parts of my life did I actually choose? Not the parts that were expected. Not the parts that signal the right things to the right people. Not the parts that close the gap in the normal loop. But the parts that, if no one could see them, you would still choose. That distinction between what you want and what you want to be seen wanting is where actual freedom begins. Because the moment you can see the difference, you stop paying for the performance. And you start building something real. That shift doesn't require discipline. It requires clarity. And clarity requires asking questions that the system is specifically designed to keep you too busy to ask. There is a version of you that existed before the script arrived. Before you learned what the right answer sounded like. Before you understood which choices required explanation and which ones got approval without question. That version had instincts. Things it moved toward naturally. Things it found meaningful before meaning was defined for it. At some point, most people make a trade. They exchange that original signal for a legible one the world can categorize, one that doesn't raise questions, one that costs approximately what it's supposed to cost and arrives on schedule. The trade is presented as growing up. Sometimes that's true. But sometimes, it's the moment you started paying for a life that belongs to everyone's expectations except yours. And the most expensive part of that trade isn't the money. It's the years. So here is the only question worth sitting with. Not, how do I spend less? Not, how do I earn more? But how much of the life I'm building would I still build if no one was watching? And how much of it only exists because someone, somewhere, decided that this is what normal looks like? If you find value in understanding the systems behind wealth, power, and history, consider subscribing. Here on Silent Standard, we explore the financial strategies, institutions, and ideas that shape the world we live in today. Thank you for watching.